The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Introduction. The Miseducation of the Negro is an intergenerational black classic, one of the few must read. Books recommended by almost everyone when an individual wants a more balanced view about what education has really meant to the people of African descent in America. Though the book was written almost 8 decades ago, it has the relevance of a recent work. Many statements and observations provided by Professor Woodson will give the reader the feeling of, yes, I know the people just like that. The son of former enslaved Africans James and Eliza Riddle, Professor Woodson was an African-American historian, author, and founder of the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History, of one of the first scholars to study African-American history, as well as a founder of the Journal of Negro History, commonly known as the Journal of African American History. Crowned the father of Black history, Dr. Woodson earned his doctorate in 1912 at Harvard, no small feat considering only the legendary William E. Burghardt, W.E.B. Du Bois preceded him. Tied inexorably to his Black roots, he was also a member of the first Black fraternity Sigma Pi Phi and a member of the Omega Psi Phi. His signature work is a veritable treasure trove of insights and for many a lasting source of enlightenment. Aptly entitled The Miseducation of the Negro, he gives numerous examples of spanning practically every professional vocation, teaching, medicines, law, business, politics, writers, artists, and religion, of how certain so-called educated Negroes have been negatively trained and opposed to positively educated in self-development. The American Negro, he says, has taken over an abundance of information which others have made accessible to the oppressed, but he has not yet learned, think, and plan for himself and others do for themselves. He cleverly demonstrates that within the we reality of other ethnic and racial groups, they have had an inverted education that's centered on the me as in miseducation. In addition, these misguided professionals often give credence to the dual myths of white supremacy and Black inferiority. In a telling example of their mindset, he writes that the present system under the control of whites trains the Negro to be white and at the same time convinces him of the impropriety of the impossibility of his becoming white. It compels the Negro to become a good Negro. The Negro mind has been all but perfectly enslaved in that he has been trained to think that is desired of him. The highly educated Negroes do not like to hear anything uttered against this procedure because they make their living in this way, and they feel that they must defend the system. His scathing attack on educated Negroes, as he calls them, was not done with malice, but as a revealing expose of many problems confronting the Negroes of his time and Black Americans today. Disturbingly, his scholarly observations make the reader feel as if she is in the time loop, repeating the same mistakes over and over again. He unintentionally reveals that our growth curve is certainly lacking. However, he is not a man of more criticism or bombast. He also offers alternatives and solutions for the upliftment of Black people that are as pertinent today as they were in his times, if not more so. To start, he makes the indicting statement. The educated Negroes have the attitudes of contempt toward their own people because in their hearts as well as in their mixed schools, Negroes are taught to admire Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin, and the Teuton, and to despise the African. Today, that practice is denied, but how many of us has bothered to attempt an in-depth study of African culture? How many historically Black colleges and universities have African studies as a primary discipline worthy of a scientific and intelligent inquiry as the major white universities do for Greece and Rome? Reading the works of this century's preeminent Black historian Gelk Alta Diop, starting with the African origin of a civilization and barbarism or civilization, the works J.A. Rogers' various volumes of Sex and Race, especially Volume 1. John Jackson's introductions to African civilization, George M. James, A Stolen Legacy, Yosef Benyatin, African Origins of Western Civilization, or the series of works in the Journals of African Civilizations edited by Ivan van Sertima, will help to provide indisputable evidence of African primary role in Western civilization, and particularly in civilization in general. They can provide a real education worthy of serious inquiries that at the end will make us stronger and more confident. Professor G.C. Woodson highlights the importance of studying one's own history with their empowering declaration. The Negro stands just as high as others in contributing to the progress of the world. He also points out the mythical view of white supremacists. The oppressor, however, raised his voice to the contrary. He teaches the Negro that he has no worthwhile past, that his race has done nothing significant since the beginning of time, and that there is no evidence that he will ever achieve anything great. To which he responds, if you teach the Negro that he has accomplished as much good as any other race, he will aspire to equality and justice without regard to race. Such an effort without upset the program of the professor in Africa and in America. The Negro can be made proud of his past only by approaching it scientifically himself and giving his own story to the world. What others have written about the Negro during the last 3 centuries has been mainly for the purpose of bringing him where he is today and hold him there. This is why Professor Richard Leakey, the preeminent paleoanthropologist, who also single-handedly provides the African origins of man, has brought our attention to the fact that the world is always questioning the premise whether blacks have made any meaningful contribution to the world's progress. In Advancing Solutions, the Black's Genius explains that the need for introspection and the examination of people of African descent in America in determining how best to improve the conditions of the race. Says Professor Woodson, the program for the uplift of the Negro in this country must be based upon a scientific study of the Negro from within to develop in him the power to do for himself what his oppressors would never do to elevate him to the level of others. Elsewhere he exhorts, they must begin immediately to pool their earnings and organize industries to participate in supplying social and economic demands. Pity we have not listened to this great scholar earlier, because now it seems that black unemployment is at an all-time high, and in America for blacks it feels more like a Great Depression rather than a Great Recession. In addition, he stressed the importance of learning one's history as a prelude to establishing institutions that will uplift and support African Americans, Negroes in the non-nomenclature of his time in a free, independent way. Not surprisingly, many of us are under the delusion that as far as race relations are concerned, we have arrived at the proverbial promised land, and we do not have to know or study our wonderful history of achievements. However, we should be aware of the fact that today we have less black independence business and institutions than in the recent past when we were forced to do for ourselves. Books like Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, American Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing by Joy DeGraw Leary, and The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexandra, unveiled the long-lasting demanding effects of enslavement and discrimination in the so-called digital age. Similarly demonstrative and revelatory are the mindless attacks on President Obama as not being an American or a Christian, along with the fact that many of the Republican candidates refuse to address him as President Obama, after who likes an uppity nigger who doesn't know his place. Likewise, we have evidence of a persistent vein of racial hatred as noted in recent books like The New Hate by Arthur Goldwag or The Obama Hate Machine by Bill Press, clearly disclosing the ones behind a despicable attacks on a black man who happens to be the President of the United States. Or the fact that a black teenager cannot walk in his own neighborhood without being shot and murdered for being young and wearing a black skin, as in the case of Trayvon Martin in Florida. All of which serves to validate the Harvard-educated Professor C. Woodson earlier conclusions. More recently, however, little things have changed. Indeed, how dare the black Congress, Barack Obama, not only aspire to be the president, but actually become one, the nerve. In contrast, The miseducation of the Negro is not an outdated version of an immodesty towards anyone. In fact, it is a sincere attempt to improve race relations, the author having participated in the education of the black, brown, yellow, and white races in both hemispheres and in the tropical and temperate regions. Further to cite Professor Woodson in his preface, this book then is not intended as a broadside against any particular person or class, but it is given as a corrective of methods which have not produced satisfactory results. To improve our present conditions, we must therefore engage and develop certain proactive agendas. The first law of power is unity. The late Professor John Henry Clark consistently maintained that we as a people have never been taught by our former enslavers how to be responsible handlers of power. Wealth, financially independence, and power are a group reality, the opposite of an individualistic one. A fact that explains why Professor Woodson Clarion called for unity is an unmistakable underlying thing that permeates throughout the book. Without group unity, there is no meaningful power. By unveiling the various manifestations of a miseducation, Professor Woodson conversely has in effect revealed the elements of a true education, one that leads to empowerment, not slavish imitation. So let us end with his prescription for what the real qualification of a leader should be. He declares, whoever is greatest among you, let him be your servant. In the memory of a true leader, Carter G. Woodson and his tirling, incomparable work that has taken the mist out of education for us all. Arthur Endus Kamat Kush. What they never told you in history class. Let us proceed to chapter 1. Chapter 1 of the miseducation of the so-called Negro. The seat of the trouble. The educated Negroes have the attitude of contempt toward their own people because in their own as well as in their mixed schools, Negroes are taught to admire the Hebrew, the Greek, Latin, and the Tuantan, and to despise the African. Of the hundreds of Negro high schools recently examined by an expert in the United States Bureau of Education, only 18 offer a course taking up the history of the Negro. And in most of the Negro colleges and universities where the Negro is thought of, the race is studied only as a problem or dismissed as a little consequence. For example, an officer of a Negro university, thinking that an additional course on the Negro should be given there, called upon a Negro doctor of philosophy of the faculty to offer such work. He promptly informed the officer that he knew nothing about the Negro. He did not go to the school to waste his time that way. He went to be educated in a system which dismisses the Negro as a non-entity. At a Negro summer school 2 years ago, a white instructor gave a course on the Negro, using for his text a work which teaches that whites are superior to the blacks. When asked by one of the students why he used such a textbook, the instructor replied that he wanted them to get that point of view. Even schools for Negroes then are places where they must be convinced of their inferiority. The thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies. If he happens to leave school after he masters the fundamentals, before he finishes high school or reaches college, he will maturely escape some of the bias and may recover in time to be service to his people. Particularly all of the successful Negroes in this country are the uneducated type, or that of the Negroes who have had no formal education at all. The large majority of the Negroes who have put on finishing touches of our best colleges are all but worthless in the development of their people. If after leaving school they have the opportunity to give out to Negroes what traducers of this world, of the race would like to have it learned, such persons may thereby earn a living at teaching or preaching what they have been taught, but they never become constructive force in the development of the race. The so-called school then becomes a questionable factor in the life of this despised people. As Arthur has well said to the handicapped, a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse, that is a struggle to change his condition, is hopeless to the worst assortment of lynching. It kills one's aspirations and dooms him to a vagabondage and crime. It is strange then that the friends of truth and the promoters of freedom have not risen up against the present propaganda in the schools and crushed it. This crusade is much more important than the anti-lynching movement, because there is be no lynching if it did not start in the classroom. Why not exploit, enslave, or exterminate a class that everybody is taught to regard as inferior? To be more explicit, we may go to the seat of the trouble. Our most widely known scholars have been trained in university outside of the South, Northern and Western institutions. However, have we had not to deal with matters which concern the Negro especially, they must direct their attention to the problems of the majority of their constituents, and too often they have simulated their prejudice by referring to the Negro unworthy of consideration. Most of what these universities has offered as language, mathematics, and science may have served a good purpose, but much of what they have taught as economics, history, literature, religion, and philosophy and is propaganda cant that involve a waste of time and misdirected the Negroes thus trained. And even in the certitude of science, of mathematics, it has been unfortunate that the approach to the Negro has been borrowed from a foreign method. For example, the teaching of arithmetic in the 5th grade in a backward county in Mississippi should mean one thing in the Negro school and a decidedly different thing in a white school. The Negro children, as a rule, come from the homes of tenders of peons and who have migrated annually from plantation to plantation looking for light which they have never seen. The children from the homes of white planters and merchants live permanently in the midst of calculations, family budgets, and the like, which enable them sometimes to learn more by contact that the Negro can acquire in school. Instead of teaching such Negro children less with arithmetic, they should be taught much more of it than the white children. For the latter attend a grade schools consolidated by free transportation, when the Negroes go to the one-room rented hovels to be taught without equipment and by incompetent teachers educated scarcely beyond the 8th grade. In schools of theology, Negroes are taught the interpretation of the Bible worked out by those who have justified segregation and winked at the economic debasement of the Negro sometimes almost to the point of starvation. Deriving their sense of right from the teaching, graduates of such school has no message to grip the people whom they have been ill-trained and served. Most of such miseducated ministers therefore preach to benches, while illiterate Negro preachers do their best they can in supplying the spiritual needs of the masses. In the schools of business administration, Negroes are trained exclusively in the psychology and economics of Wall Street and or thereof, made to despise the opportunities to run ice wagons, push bananas carts, and sell peanuts among their own people. Foreigners who have not studied economics but have studied Negroes take up this business and grow rich. In schools of journalism, Negroes are being taught how to edit such metropolitan dailies as the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times, which will hardly hire a Negro as a janitor. And when these graduates come to the Negro weeklies for employment, they are not prepared to function in such establishments, which, to be successful, must be built upon accurate knowledge of the psychology and philosophy of the Negro. When the Negro has finished his education in our schools, then he has been equipped to the life of the Americanized or Europeanized white man. But before he steps from the threshold of his alma mater, he is told by his teachers that he must go back to his own people from whom he has been estranged by a vision of ideas, which is in a delusionment he will realize that he cannot attain. He goes forth to play his part in life, but he must be both social and bisocial at the same time. While he is a part of the body politic, he is, in addition to this, a member of a particular race to which he must restrict himself in all matters social. While serving his country, he must serve within a special group. While being a good American, he must above all things be a good Negro. And to perform this definite function, he must learn to stay in a Negro's place. For the adroitest attack of serving a race thus handicapped, however, the Negro graduated has had little or no training at all. The people The people whom he had been ordered to serve had been belittled by his teachers to the extent that he can hardly find delight in undertaking what his education has led him to think is impossible. Considering his race as blank achievement, then, he sets out to stimulate their imitation of others. The persons is kept up a while, but like any other effort at meaningless imitation, it results in failure. Facing the undesirable result, that highly educated Negro often grows sour. He becomes too pessimistic to be a constructive force and usually develops into a chronic fault finder or a compliant at the bar of public opinion. Often, when he sees that the fault lies at the door of the white oppressor whom he is afraid to attack, he turns upon the pioneer Negro who is at work doing the best he can to extricate himself from an uncomfortable predicament. In this effort to imitate, however, these educated people are sincere. They hope to make the Negro conform quickly to the standard of the whites and thus remove the pretext for the barriers between the races. They do not realize, however, that even if the Negroes do successfully imitate the whites, nothing new has thereby been accomplished. You simply have a large number of persons doing what others have been doing. The unusual gift of the race have not thereby been developed, and in an unwilling world, therefore, continues to wonder what the Negro is good for. These educated people, however, decry any such thing as race consciousness, and in some respects they are right. They do not like to hear such expression as Negro literature, Negro poetry, African art, or thinking black. And roughly speaking, we must concede that such things do not exist. These things did not figure in these courses which they persuade in schools, and why should they? Aren't we all Americans? Then whatever is American is as much the heritage of the Negro as any other group in this country. The highly educated contend more than ever that when the Negro emphasizes these things, he invites racial discrimination by recognizing such differences of the races. The thought that the Negro is one thing and the white man another is the stock and trade argument of the Caucasian to justify segregation. Why then should the Negro blame the white man for doing what he himself does? These highly educated Negroes, however, fail to see that it is not the Negro who takes this position, the white man forces him to it. And to educate himself, therefore, the Negro leader must so deal with the simulation as to develop in the segregated group the power with which they can elevate themselves. The differences of race, moreover, is no evidence of superiority or of inferiority. This merely indicates that each race has certain gifts which the others do not possess. It is by development of these gifts that every race must justify its rights to exist.